The room was busy, filled with chatter and clinking dishes. People moved from table to table, talking, laughing, or checking their phones. The aroma of coffee and pastries hung in the air, mingling with the faint scent of polished wood. At the corner of the room, near the old upright piano, a woman quietly tidied the chairs. She had been here for years, always in the background, always unnoticed. Most people didn't even know she worked there. She smiled politely when someone waved, nodded when a child ran past, but she stayed quiet. Her movements calm and almost invisible. The piano had been there for decades. Its keys worn from use, but no one really played it anymore. It was more decoration than instrument, a piece of the cafe's history that people forgot existed. She glanced at it from across the room and felt a small tug in her chest. She liked music. She always had. Not the loud, flashy kind that drew attention, but music that felt like a conversation with someone you could never see. Sometimes, when the cafe was empty, or nearly empty, she would sit at the piano and let her fingers find their own rhythm, letting thoughts and memories pour out quietly. Today was just another ordinary day. People came and went, the usual crowd of office workers on lunch break, students with laptops and a few older regulars who came to read their newspapers. She moved from table to table, clearing crumbs, refilling coffee cups, and making sure everything stayed neat. Her life was simple and quiet, the kind of life that could be overlooked if someone didn't pay attention. She liked it that way. There was a comfort in routine, in the predictability of small tasks and familiar faces. A man approached the counter. He wasn't a regular. She noticed him because he moved differently than the others, carefully, almost cautiously. He looked around the room as if searching for something he couldn't name. When his gaze finally landed on her, he smiled politely. "Excuse me," he said, his voice soft but clear. "I noticed the piano over there. Would you mind playing something? Just something simple. Anything, really." "I'd love to hear it." She paused, fingers brushing the edge of a clean cloth. Her heart skipped a beat. She wasn't expecting anyone to ask. People usually ignored her, and the piano was often overlooked. Playing in front of strangers was not something she did. She wasn't a performer. She was quiet, reserved, careful not to draw attention. Yet something about his request felt gentle, almost kind. "I can play," she said softly, unsure why the words came out. She had been asked to play before, but she always said no. Today, for some reason, she nodded. "Just something simple?" she asked, almost seeking confirmation. He nodded, smiling warmly. "Yes, something simple. Whatever you like." She walked toward the piano, each step feeling heavier than the last. Her mind raced with questions. Would she remember the right notes? Would it sound okay? Would people listen, or just keep talking and moving? She took a deep breath and lifted the lid of the piano. The keys looked familiar, worn from years of use, but welcoming. She placed her hands on them and paused, letting the quiet energy of the room settle around her. Her fingers hovered, unsure where to start. She thought of a simple melody she had played countless times in private, the one that always made her feel at ease. She pressed the first key lightly. A clear, soft note rang out, filling the small corner of the room. She glanced up briefly. Conversations continued around her, people talking and laughing. Unaware of the gentle sound that had begun to emerge, encouraged by the note, she pressed the next one. The melody slowly took shape, simple and quiet, but deliberate. Her fingers moved almost instinctively, remembering patterns and movements from years past. The sound was soft, not meant to command attention. But there was a presence to it, a calm that seemed to ripple through the nearby tables. Some people glanced up, curious about the sudden music, but most were still lost in their own conversations. The woman closed her eyes for a moment. She let herself feel the music, letting it flow naturally. Memories flickered through her mind: childhood, afternoons spent at an old piano in her family's living room, evenings when she played to calm herself after a long day, moments of joy and quiet sadness that no one had ever seen. The notes carried fragments of her life, small pieces of herself that she had tucked away and never shared. A few patrons paused, forks hovering over plates, heads tilting as they listened. There was a subtle shift in the air, something changing that she could feel but not yet see. The man who had asked her to play leaned back in his chair, a small smile on his face. He didn't speak, didn't interrupt. He just listened, letting the music flow over him like a gentle tide. She continued to play, each note simple, each pause intentional. She didn't rush or try to impress. She only let the melody speak. The room's usual noise seemed to fade slightly, conversations softening as people unconsciously tuned in. It was as if the piano had a magnetic pull. Drawing attention slowly and quietly without forcing it, her confidence grew with each passing moment. She realized she wasn't performing for anyone else. She was simply sharing a part of herself, a small, unspoken truth she had kept hidden. The music didn't need approval or applause. It was enough that it existed, that it moved through the air and touched whatever ears were willing to hear. Time seemed to stretch, the outside world fading for a while. The busy cafe, the clatter of dishes, the murmur of voices, all of it became background to the simple, flowing melody she created. She felt connected to the room in a way she hadn't before. The piano wasn't just an object. It was a bridge. It connected her past to this moment, her feelings to the unknown lives around her. It was small, almost invisible, yet powerful. A child near the window stopped playing with a toy and turned to watch her fingers dance across the keys. An older woman, reading a newspaper, lowered it and let the lines blur as she absorbed the music. Even those who didn't look directly at her seemed to quiet down, their movements slowing, the tension in their shoulders easing. She had expected to play something simple and forgettable. Instead, the notes took on a life of their own. Each key seemed to hold a memory, each chord a quiet emotion. The music wasn't loud or flashy, but it had a weight, a presence that was undeniable. It was intimate, honest, and human. She noticed small smiles forming on some faces, subtle nod from a man sitting alone, a quiet hum from someone tapping their fingers to the rhythm. It wasn't attention in the way of applause or cheering, but it was deeper recognition, a shared moment of understanding. She felt her chest tighten slightly, a mix of nervousness and something she couldn't name. She was used to being invisible, unnoticed. But now there was an awareness around her, gentle and unspoken. Minutes passed like seconds. The melody continued to flow from her fingers, soft and deliberate, each note carrying a fragment of her story. She wasn't thinking about the audience. She wasn't thinking about how she sounded or whether anyone cared. She was thinking about the music itself, about letting it exist in the world, letting it breathe, letting it connect. She glanced up briefly and saw the man who had requested the song watching her intently. There was a quiet gratitude in his eyes, a softness that made her realize how much power a simple melody could hold. It could reach across the distance between strangers and touch something deeper, something universal. The first part of her simple performance came to an end. She let the last note linger in the air, a soft echo that seemed to settle over the cafe. For a moment, no one spoke. The usual clatter and chatter had dimmed, replaced by a shared, almost sacred silence. The pause felt significant, like a collective intake of breath. A moment of understanding that didn't need words. She lowered her hands from the keys, unsure of what to do next. Her heart was beating a little faster, not from fear, but from something closer to awe. She hadn't meant to do anything extraordinary, only to play something simple. Yet the room had shifted around her, and she could feel it, subtle but undeniable. Something quiet and human had just happened, and she had been the one to start it. People slowly returned to their own conversations. But the energy in the room had changed. There was a new attentiveness, a gentleness that wasn't there before. The man who had asked her to play smiled at her again and nodded, a silent thank you that carried more meaning than words ever could. She walked back to her usual duties, clearing tables, refilling drinks, moving as she always did. But inside, something had shifted. The piano had not been just an instrument, and the melody had not been just notes. It had been a moment of connection, a tiny revelation that even in a quiet, ordinary life, a single choice could touch many hearts. She returned to her work, hands steady, but her mind lingered on the music and the soft, invisible ripple it had created across the room. This was the beginning. She didn't yet know how far it would reach. The day went on quietly after that first simple melody. The cafe returned to its usual rhythm, yet something lingered in the air, subtle but noticeable. Patrons were still chatting, but their voices seemed softer, less hurried. The woman went about her work, refilling cups, wiping tables, arranging chairs. Yet her mind remained on the piano and the moment she had just shared. There was a strange warmth in her chest, a sense that something small had shifted, even if she couldn't see it clearly. She kept glancing at the piano as she moved around the room. It was as if it were calling her back. She hadn't intended to play more, but the memory of those soft notes lingered, tugging at her fingers. She felt a mix of curiosity and hesitation. Was it possible to share more? To let the music speak a little longer? And yet, what if people thought she was intruding or making a mistake? The thought of drawing attention made her stomach tighten. But there was also a quiet excitement she couldn't deny. The man who had requested the song earlier had left. But another group of people lingered near the window, chatting quietly and sipping their drinks. One of them glanced over at the piano and smiled at her, nodding gently. It was a small gesture, but it felt like encouragement. She took a deep breath and decided to return to the keys. She moved slowly, not wanting to rush or force the moment. Letting herself adjust to the quiet hum of the cafe, sitting down at the piano again, she placed her hands lightly on the keys. Her fingers hovered for a moment, unsure where to begin, and then she pressed a soft note. The sound felt different this time, more personal, more intimate. She wasn't just filling the room with music. She was letting a part of herself flow into it. It was still simple, but there was a depth now, a sense of memory and feeling woven into every note. As she continued, the cafe seemed to shift around her. Conversations slowed naturally, forks paused mid-air, and the soft clatter of cups faded into the background. People turned their heads slightly, curious about the music, drawn to it without realizing it. The melody was gentle, unassuming, yet it held a strange power, as if it could reach into the hearts of those listening without asking for permission. She closed her eyes and let herself feel the music. Each note seemed to echo moments from her past quiet afternoons alone with a book and a piano. Evenings spent listening to the rain on the windowsill, times of happiness and sadness she had never spoken about. The melody became a bridge, connecting her private memories with the present moment. She wasn't aware of anyone in particular listening, but she could sense their presence. The way the room seemed to breathe a little differently. A young woman, sitting near the counter, stopped scrolling on her phone and looked toward the piano. Her eyes softened as she listened, and she unconsciously leaned forward, drawn to the sound. Across the room, an older man lifted his head from a newspaper, his fingers resting on the edge of the table as if the music had reached into him and touched a memory he hadn't thought about in years. Even those who didn't look directly at her seemed to feel it. A quiet acknowledgement of something beautiful and fleeting. The woman continued to play, each note deliberate and calm. She wasn't performing. She was simply sharing a part of herself, letting the music exist without expectation. The rhythm was slow but steady, like a heartbeat, and it carried a quiet honesty. There was no grand gesture, no attempt to impress. The beauty lay in its simplicity, in the way it could touch lives without words. A small group of children near the window paused in their game, their laughter quieting as they listened. One of them whispered to another, pointing subtly at the piano. They didn't understand the complexity of the music, but they felt its emotion, its warmth. The woman noticed the glance, and it brought a small, almost shy smile to her face. Music had a way of speaking to everyone, even in ways words could not. She shifted slightly on the piano bench, letting her hands move freely, exploring the keys with more confidence now. Each note carried a part of her story, fragments of dreams, moments of loss, instances of quiet hope. She realized that the music was no longer just for herself. It had become a conversation, a silent sharing of human experience. People around her, strangers, were listening, connecting without speaking, sharing something deep and invisible. Time began to blur. Minutes stretched, and she didn't notice the passing hours. The cafe's usual background noises had faded almost entirely, replaced by the gentle flow of melody. Some people were leaning closer to listen. Others simply paused, letting the music wash over them. The woman's heart felt full, not from attention or recognition, but from the quiet intimacy of the moment. She had never felt more alive, more connected to the world around her. A middle-aged woman, usually reserved and quiet, had stopped reading her newspaper and closed it completely. She rested her hands on her lap, eyes glistening slightly as the notes carried memories of her own. She wasn't sure why she felt this way, only that the music had unlocked something inside her. Across the room, a man with a laptop put it aside, letting his focus drift entirely to the piano. There was no need for conversation or explanation. The music said what words could not. The melody became richer without her realizing it. She allowed herself to take small liberties, letting her hands explore patterns that felt natural. The tune was still simple, but there was a subtle depth that added layers of emotion. She felt the room responding, not through words but through presence, through stillness, through small gestures of attention. It was as if the piano and its music had created a quiet bond between everyone present. Her mind wandered to thoughts she rarely allowed herself to entertain. Memories of her family, friends she had lost touch with. Moments of quiet happiness and silent sorrow all flowed through her fingers. She realized that music had always been her companion, a way to express feelings she couldn't put into words. Now, sitting here in front of strangers, it was no longer private. It had become a shared experience, a moment of collective humanity. A young man at a corner table had been typing away on his phone, but he stopped mid-word, listening intently. He leaned back in his chair, eyes closing, as he let the melody wash over him. For a brief moment, the world outside the cafe, the work he had to do, the pressures of life, all of it seemed to fade. The music became a gentle reminder of simpler, quieter moments. Of emotions often overlooked but always present. The woman felt a wave of emotion herself. Her hands trembled slightly, not from nervousness, but from the power of the music, from realizing how deeply it could touch others. She continued to play, letting the melody unfold naturally, aware that each note carried not just her own story, but a reflection of those listening. It was quiet, intimate, and profoundly human. She began to notice small, subtle reactions around the room. A man near the window wiped his eyes discreetly. A woman quietly adjusted her scarf, as if to steady herself against a sudden wave of feeling. Children glanced at each other, sensing the change in the room, the shift in mood, though they didn't fully understand why. The music had become more than sound. It had become a shared emotional landscape, unspoken but deeply felt. She allowed herself to smile softly, a sense of wonder filling her heart. She had only meant to play something simple, to give a small moment of music to a few people. Instead, it had become something larger, something alive. She felt connected to each person in the room, even if they didn't know her, even if they had never noticed her before. The music had created a bridge, a fleeting connection between strangers. And she was humbled by it. Time passed in this quiet rhythm. She didn't look at the clock, didn't notice the day fading outside the windows. The cafe existed only in this moment of shared music and emotion. Each note she played was a gentle thread, weaving together the experiences of herself and those listening. It was simple, yet profound, a testament to the power of quiet acts of gentle presence. Something as small as a few notes played on an old piano. As the melody wound down, she felt a deep sense of peace. She had started the day thinking it would be ordinary, routine, unnoticed. Instead, she had created a moment that felt extraordinary, not in spectacle, but in human connection. She realized that music, even when simple, could touch lives in ways that words could never reach. She allowed the last notes to linger, soft and delicate, a quiet ending to a shared journey. The room, now fully aware of the depth of the moment, remained still, as if holding its breath before slowly returning to its normal rhythm. For the woman, this was just the beginning. She didn't yet know where it would lead, how far the ripple of this simple melody would travel, what it might awaken in those who had heard it. But for now, she simply breathed, letting the quiet energy of the room settle around her. feeling a connection she had never felt before. The piano had spoken, the music had moved, and for the first time in a long time, she felt truly seen, truly part of something larger than herself. The piano continued to hum softly, each note carrying a gentle emotion, but today there was something different in her playing. The woman felt a pull not just from the music itself, but from memories that had been tucked away, memories she hadn't shared with anyone. She hadn't planned to let them surface. But the melody seemed to have a way of unlocking feelings she had held inside for years. It started with small, almost invisible images in her mind, her mother humming in the kitchen as she baked bread, the way her father tapped his fingers to a rhythm she didn't understand. Quiet afternoons when she sat by the window, listening to rain fall outside, and the small piano tucked in the corner of their living room. She remembered how music had always been there for her. A gentle friend she could rely on, even when the world felt distant or unkind. As she let her fingers wander across the keys, these memories began to shape the melody. It was still simple, but now it held depth, a story that was not spoken but could be felt. Each note seemed to carry a fragment of her life, from the small joys to the quiet disappointments, the fleeting moments of hope, and the gentle ache of longing. She didn't intend to reveal anything, yet the music revealed it anyway, as if it had its own will. The room around her seemed to respond. People leaned forward slightly, their attention caught by something subtle, yet profound. Conversations had stopped entirely. A man in a corner set down his book and rested his elbows on the table, his eyes soft and thoughtful. A woman near the counter clasped her hands together, her breathing steadying as if she were holding on to something long forgotten. Even the children, who usually had no patience for quiet, still moments, were captivated. They didn't understand the music fully, but they felt its weight, its gentle truth. The woman's heart began to race, not from fear, but from the unexpected intensity of the moment. She hadn't realized the music could reach so deeply, even without words. Her fingers trembled slightly over the keys, and she paused for a brief second, taking in the faces around her. There were no strangers now, only listeners who were somehow part of this shared experience. Connected by the invisible thread of melody, she smiled softly, almost shyly, and resumed playing, allowing the music to carry her forward. With every note, she began to remember more. Times of quiet frustration when things didn't go as planned, moments of unspoken grief, the sting of disappointment, and the fleeting nature of happiness. She thought of the friends she had lost touch with, the letters she had never sent, and the dreams she had tucked away in a drawer to keep safe from the harshness of life. The piano didn't judge her. It held her story gently, allowing it to unfold in a way that words never could. As the melody deepened, a few tears slid quietly down her cheeks. She didn't stop. She let them fall, letting the music carry them away. There was no shame in this moment, only the honesty of human emotion. People in the cafe noticed, but didn't interrupt. He understood without being told that this was a private moment shared openly. A subtle hush had settled over the room, as if the air itself had grown heavier with the weight of unspoken feelings. A young woman near the window reached for a napkin to dab her eyes. Moved by something she couldn't explain, an older man pressed, his hands together in his lap, his gaze fixed on the piano, lost in thought. Even the barista behind the counter stopped wiping glasses, letting the soft notes wash over her. The music had become more than sound. It had become a vessel carrying raw, unfiltered emotion from one person to many, invisible yet undeniable. The woman's mind wandered to moments that had shaped her quietly. She remembered a time when she had wanted to learn a complex song but had been too afraid to try. She recalled the first time she had touched the piano as a child, feeling the vibration of the keys beneath her fingers, the sense of wonder it had sparked, and the pure joy she had felt. The melody she played now carried fragments of all those experiences. Weaving them together into something living, something human, her playing became more fluid as she lost herself in the music. It was no longer just about the notes or the rhythm. It was about conveying what she had never spoken aloud. Each chord echoed with memory, each pause with reflection. She could feel the room leaning into her melody, each listener drawing a piece of themselves into the music, even if they didn't realize it. The cafe had transformed, if only for a brief time, from a busy public space to a place of quiet reflection and shared humanity. Young boy sitting near the window rested his chin on his hand, staring at the piano with wide eyes. He didn't fully understand the sadness or the joy in the music, but he felt its honesty. A soft smile played on his lips, and he leaned back in his chair, absorbing the sounds with an intensity that made the woman's heart swell. Somewhere in the room, someone's hand clenched a little, as if the music had given them permission to feel. Each person was touched differently, yet all were united in the unspoken language of her melody. The woman's eyes still closed. She allowed herself to fully inhabit the moment. She remembered times she had felt invisible, times she had doubted herself, times when she had worried that nothing she did mattered. And yet here she was, quietly playing a piano in a cafe, and the music had moved people, had reached into their hearts. The thought was almost overwhelming, she continued, letting each note carry more of her story, her emotions spilling into the melody, her soul visible through sound. People in the cafe shifted slightly, leaning in closer without speaking. Some pressed their hands to their chests, feeling the subtle tug of memory and emotion. Others simply let the music wash over them, their faces soft, their expressions thoughtful. She couldn't see their full reactions, but she could sense them. Each note she played was no longer hers alone. It had become a shared experience, a ripple extending outward from the piano bench into the lives of those listening. She began to play patterns that she had not tried in years, small improvisations that felt natural, almost instinctive. The melody became more personal, more honest, more revealing. She thought of moments she had buried deep, moments of longing, moments of quiet hope, and moments of loss. The music carried them all, gently but insistently, touching something within each listener. Her tears came more freely now, but she didn't stop. The act of playing had become a release, a way to process memories and emotions that she had never allowed herself to confront fully. And as she played, she realized that the audience was not separate from her. They were witnesses, yes, but also participants in the human experience she was sharing. The music was a bridge, connecting hearts without words, creating a moment of understanding that was fragile and beautiful. An elderly woman in the corner rested her hands on the table, leaning slightly forward. Her eyes glistened as she listened, and a small tremble ran through her lips. She wasn't sure why the music affected her so deeply, only that it did. Across the room, a man's foot tapped lightly, not in rhythm, but as if to anchor himself to the moment, to let the music reach him fully. The atmosphere was charged with quiet emotion, an invisible thread connecting everyone to the woman and to each other. She began to slow the melody, letting the notes linger in the air, stretching them just enough to let each one resonate. Hands moved with careful deliberation, aware that she was sharing something profound yet fragile. Each pause was intentional, giving space for reflection, for feeling, for recognition. She felt a deep connection to the music, to the memories it carried, and to the room that had become so alive with listening hearts. As the final notes of this part of her melody faded, there was a gentle stillness. No one spoke immediately. There was no rush to applaud or comment. Instead, there was an unspoken acknowledgement, a quiet respect for what had just been shared. The room had been transformed, momentarily, into a space where emotion could be felt openly and without judgment. She lifted her hands from the keys slowly, feeling a mixture of exhaustion and exhilaration. Her chest rose and fell rapidly, not from fear, but from the intensity of the moment. She had shared something personal, something raw, and the room had received it. The experience was humbling, almost surreal. She realized that music, even simple music, had a power beyond explanation. It could speak when words failed, touch hearts without effort, and create a shared understanding that was quiet but profound. As she sat back on the piano bench for a brief moment, taking in the room around her, she saw the subtle reactions on the faces of those who had listened. Eyes glistened, soft smiles appeared, and a gentle warmth filled the space. For a brief, shining moment, the ordinary cafe had become a place of connection, a testament to the quiet strength of human emotion and the beauty of sharing something personal, even with strangers. The woman breathed deeply, feeling the music's echo in her chest. She knew this was just the beginning of something larger, a journey she hadn't anticipated. The piano, the melody, and the audience had combined to create a moment that would linger long after the last note faded. And as she moved her hands gently, preparing to rise from the bench, she felt a quiet hope. A sense that even the simplest act of playing could awaken hearts, stir emotions, and leave a lasting impression. This was the power she had always known. Quietly and intimately, now revealed to the world in the softest, most human way possible. The cafe had grown quiet, the usual buzz of conversation replaced by a weightless stillness. The woman sat at the piano, fingers poised above the keys, feeling the subtle energy in the room. The music she played had shifted from simple notes into something alive, something that carried her emotions into the air. Each chord seemed to reach beyond her fingers, touching hearts and bringing the inner lives of her listeners into alignment with the melody. She hadn't intended for anyone to be affected this deeply, but it was happening, and she felt both nervous and humbled by it. She began to play again, letting the melody flow more freely, allowing her memories to shape the tune. There were no boundaries, no rehearsed patterns. It was all instinct, a reflection of her life and experiences. She thought of her childhood, of afternoons spent alone at the piano, of afternoons that felt quiet and infinite. She remembered times of longing, of loss, of moments when she felt unseen, even by those closest to her. Those emotions now poured into the music, each note carrying fragments of her life, raw and honest. Around her, the room shifted. Conversations had stopped completely. A woman sitting near the counter wiped her eyes discreetly, as if afraid anyone might notice the tears that had begun to fall. Across the room, a man clasped his hands together, pressing them against his chest, feeling the rhythm of the melody resonate with something deep inside. Even children, who normally had no patience for quiet, were still listening with wide, uncomprehending eyes. The energy of the room had changed. It was no longer just a cafe, but a space suspended in the quiet intimacy of shared feeling. The woman didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her fingers moved across the keys with gentle precision, creating a narrative that was silent but powerful. She thought of moments she had never shared with anyone. Moments of heartbreak, quiet victories, and hidden dreams. Each note was a message she could not put into words, a story told through sound. The audience responded in ways that words could not measure. Each person, absorbing the music in their own private way, yet all connected by it. Tears began to fall from her eyes, slowly, quietly. She didn't stop playing. She let them mix with the music, feeling the release of emotions she had held in for years. The sound of her own vulnerability added a new layer to the melody, deepening the connection between her and those listening. The piano had become a vessel, a bridge between her life and the lives of others. Carrying shared human experience across the room, a young woman near the window reached for a napkin, dabbing at her eyes. She whispered softly to a friend, though no one else seemed to hear. It wasn't sadness that filled her, nor sorrow, but recognition. The music had touched something she hadn't realized she had stored away, a feeling long hidden under daily routine and quiet resignation. Across the cafe, an older man leaned back in his chair, eyes closed, letting the sound of the piano wash over him. His breathing slowed, and for the first time in a long while, he allowed himself to feel the simple beauty of a moment, untouched by chaos or distraction. The woman continued, her fingers moving instinctively, her heart guiding each movement. She thought of her own life, the moments she had been overlooked or underestimated, the times she had been too quiet to make herself heard. And yet here she was, unnoticed no longer, her music reaching across the space, stirring emotions she hadn't imagined would awaken. She realized the power of presence, of giving oneself fully. Even in a moment as small as a few notes played on a well-worn piano, a child sitting near the window leaned closer to the piano, whispering something to a sibling. They didn't understand the full depth of what they were hearing, but they felt it. There was an honesty, a truth in the sound that bypassed explanation. The woman smiled faintly, acknowledging them without stopping, knowing that even the youngest could sense the sincerity of her playing. Music, she thought, could be felt by anyone who was willing to listen. and it required no understanding beyond that simple willingness. Her hands moved more fluidly now, confident in the rhythm of her emotions. The melody swelled gently, but it was not dramatic or overpowering. It was a quiet power, a subtle insistence, carrying both sorrow and hope in every note. She thought of people she had known who had come and gone, the moments she had cherished, and those she had lost. Every emotion became part of the music, woven into a story that was universal, yet uniquely her own. The atmosphere in the cafe was almost sacred. People leaned into the music. Their bodies relaxed. Their expressions softened. Some pressed their palms to their hearts. Some simply breathed in the quiet resonance of the notes. The woman realized that this was more than just playing a piano. It was creating a shared experience, a moment in which strangers were allowed to feel openly and without judgment. There was power in that, quiet but undeniable, and she felt honored to be a part of it. Tears continued to fall, now not only from her, but from several people in the room. Some tried to hide them, brushing at their cheeks or turning their heads, while others accepted them openly, letting the music guide the release. It was as if the melody had unlocked something within each listener, a reminder of their own memories, their own joys and losses, their own quiet moments of reflection. The piano was no longer just an instrument. It was a mirror, reflecting the human experience back to everyone in the room. She allowed herself to linger on each note, stretching the pauses just enough to let them breathe. The music was deliberate, but not forced. It moved naturally, growing and receding like waves. She noticed the subtle reactions of those listening, each one different, yet connected by the shared experience. A middle-aged woman closed her eyes, letting a small smile form despite the tears streaming down her face. A young man rested his chin on his hand, eyes soft, lost in the cadence of the melody. Even the barista behind the counter leaned slightly forward, captivated. The woman felt her heart expand with the awareness that her music was not just a gift, but a bridge. It connected lives in a way that words rarely could. It allowed strangers to meet in a space of vulnerability, to feel alongside one another, to recognize shared humanity. She continued, letting the piano carry her emotions into the air. Knowing that even the simplest gestures, a single note, a soft chord, could have a profound impact when delivered with honesty, she began to notice small, unspoken conversations happening in the room. A woman near the counter squeezed the hand of her companion, an unspoken acknowledgement of the depth of feeling stirred by the music. Across the cafe, a man's eyes welled with tears as he silently nodded, as if understanding something he had forgotten long ago. Even the children seemed to recognize the significance of the moment, their usually restless movements still and attentive. The energy was palpable, alive with emotion, yet gentle and controlled. Her fingers moved instinctively, recalling old melodies she had learned as a child, improvising slightly, blending memory with emotion. The music carried her story, yes, but it also reflected the stories of those who listened. It was a dialogue without words, a connection forged through sound and feeling. Each note was intentional, each pause thoughtful, each chord an unspoken statement of truth. She let herself fully inhabit the moment, the tears flowing freely as she played. There was no shame, no fear, only presence and honesty. She realized that this moment was unique, fragile, and extraordinary. The cafe, ordinary moments before, had become a sanctuary, a space where emotion was allowed to rise and flow naturally. Where the boundaries between performer and audience disappeared, the melody swelled gently, carrying a quiet intensity, and then softened, each note lingering in the air just long enough to resonate. She felt a profound sense of connection, a realization that even the smallest act, played with sincerity, could reach across hearts and create something meaningful. The music was not loud or dramatic, but it was alive, breathing alongside the people who listened, filling the room with a sense of shared humanity. As the final notes lingered, a hush settled over the cafe. No one spoke immediately. There was no applause, no rush to break the fragile spell that had been created. The silence was rich, filled with unspoken acknowledgement and gratitude. It was a moment suspended in time, a recognition of the power of honesty, vulnerability, and human connection. She lifted her hands from the keys slowly, feeling the reverberation in her chest in the room. Her eyes were damp, her face soft with the release of emotion. Around her, listeners shifted slightly, some brushing at tears, some closing their eyes, some simply breathing deeply. It was a shared experience, yet deeply personal. A moment that would linger in memory far beyond the cafe walls. The woman rose from the piano bench, hands still trembling slightly, feeling both exhaustion and exhilaration. She realized that music, even when simple, had the ability to reach places words could not. It had unlocked hearts, stirred memories, and connected strangers in a fleeting yet profound way. The cafe had been transformed, even if only for a moment, and she felt a quiet sense of gratitude. Knowing she had played a part in something beautiful and human, the last note hung in the air, soft and trembling, before it faded into silence. For a few seconds, the cafe remained still, as if holding its breath. No one spoke, no one moved, and the ordinary hum of daily life seemed suspended. The woman sat at the piano, her hands slowly lifting from the keys, feeling the vibrations of the melodies still lingering in the room. Her chest rose and fell steadily, and for the first time in a long while, she felt a quiet sense of accomplishment, not for herself, but for the shared experience she had just created. The room slowly returned to motion, but the energy had shifted permanently. People were not talking loudly, not checking their phones, not rushing from one task to the next. There was a softness, a gentleness, a lingering sense of reflection. Patrons who had been moved by the music shared small, subtle gestures, smiles exchanged across tables, quiet nods, hands pressed to chests, heads bowed in thought. It was as if the music had left invisible threads connecting them, threads that carried a piece of the woman's heart to each of them. She rose from the piano bench, her hands slightly trembling, and took a moment to glance around the room. Faces she had never seen before carried emotion she could feel from across the space. Some had tears glistening in their eyes, others had smiles that seemed to hold memories and understanding. She realized slowly that something remarkable had happened. She hadn't sought attention, nor had she tried to impress anyone. She had only shared a simple act of music, yet it had touched lives, connected strangers, and brought a fleeting sense of unity to a world that often felt fragmented. The cafe manager, usually busy and preoccupied, approached quietly. He did not say much, only gave her a gentle nod and a small smile that conveyed more than words ever could. It was acknowledgement, respect, and gratitude all in one. She smiled back, shy but genuine, feeling a warmth that spread through her chest. It was a simple gesture, but in the context of the moment, it felt profound. Patrons began to rise slowly from their seats, speaking in hushed tones. Conversations resumed, but differently now, with softer words and calmer voices. People lingered at tables longer, savoring the quiet aftermath of the music. A young woman who had been moved to tears approached the woman quietly, offering a soft, grateful smile. The woman returned it, a nod of understanding passing between them without a single word spoken. It was a moment of human connection, delicate yet powerful.